22nd Ordinance Committee meeting. Mr. Crisante, will you call the roll?
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, I believe, is en route. Councilmember Snedden?
Here.
Chair Jordan?
And here also.
Thank you.
And just one item today, Mr. Crisante, if you'd read it off for us, please.
Title 25, Objective Design and Development Standards and Amendments to the Title 30 Zoning Ordinance. And before we start, we'll just check if there's any public comment that's not on the agenda. We have one hand raised, so give me one moment. And this is going to be for items not on the agenda. We have one speaker, which is Thomas Sekula. Thomas Sekula, please go ahead. Mr. Sekula, if you can unmute yourself, please go ahead. Mr. Sekula, if you would like to speak on this item, you can raise your hand again. Could have been by mistake. Chair Jordan, please proceed.
Okay. So we will close that part of public comment, and if you would read today's item, please.
I did.
What?
First item is Title 25, Objective Design and Development Standards and Amendments to the Title 30 Zoning Ordinance.
Thank you. All right. Enough people you brought with you. Pick one and let's go.
Thank you. I'll choose myself to begin. Good afternoon, Chair Jordan, committee members. I just have some brief remarks before our project manager, Rosie Dicey, begins her presentation. As we've discussed a lot, especially during the housing element discussions, to accelerate housing production, state land use and zoning laws have removed many impediments to building new housing and limiting our ability to restrict housing development. State Housing Crisis Act of 2019 now prohibits us from denying a housing development or reducing density based on subjective standards, which is what we currently have in place. We can no longer depend on the processes that have resulted in the city we have today, which is renowned for its established identity and excellent architecture. Our consultant, Opticos, staff, ABR, HLC, Planning Commission, and a focus work group and several community members have taken this task seriously, and we offer this document for your review today. These objective design and development standards provide for multi-unit buildings that can fully realize density, allowing for context-sensitive neighborhood transition envisioned in our general plan, and a speedier, clearer, more efficient review process. We discussed with the Planning Commission the need and importance to monitor projects using this and get feedback on this program to calibrate these standards as we move forward and establish a formal review and check-in with the Planning Commission if this is adopted. We want this program to be used, we want good outcomes, and need accelerated housing production for the city. That concludes my comments, and it's off to Ms. Dicey and her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. And let me interrupt just a second and just, I forgot to make an announcement, and that is here's how we're going to proceed today, and partly everybody out there should feel really happy that we won't ask 2 hours of committee questions and then invite you back some other time to make your comments. So we're going to reverse those two things. We're going to have a staff presentation, and then we're going to do public comment on the item today. And then regardless of what time that is, if some miraculous happening occurs and we finish like even at 1 o'clock, we are going to continue this item, and I'm going to be corrected if I'm wrong, December 10th? December 3rd, and bring it back then for either the continuation of public comment for people that started here today and didn't have time or decide to come later, or continue it just for council questions and then council discussion and action. So don't feel bad if this part of the presentation lasts an hour, then we're going to come right to public comment on the item. Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Jordan and members of the committee. I'm Rosie Dicey, Project Planner with the Planning Division. So the project before you today are the Title 25 Objective Design and Development Standards. We call them the ODDS, so you'll hear me use that acronym, and also related amendments to our Title 30 zoning ordinance. What I'm going to talk to you about today is why we are creating objective standards, give you some background on the project, go through a very sort of brief, quick guide to using the ODDS, another quick walkthrough of the Title 30 amendments. I'll mention some of the other actions that are included in your packet and end on a recommendation. So I'll start with why we created this project. But before I go there, I wanted to just discuss the goals of the objective design standards. And we have 4 that are repeated in the document. The first one is to increase predictability. So that gives more confidence in the city review process and consistent expectations for applicants. Promote a livable city that's pedestrian friendly. Respect the context of our existing development and our existing neighborhoods and how new buildings will fit into that fabric, and create a visual fabric to better communicate standards in what we could almost call an agreed upon catalog of already approved designs. So why we started this project is first and foremost, there's state laws we need to comply with. The Housing Accountability Act has been around for quite a while, but it's been continuously amended, and it's the state's overarching policy that the city cannot deny or reduce density of housing projects or multi-unit housing projects that are compliant with objective criteria. Senate Bill 35 in 2017 was the first instance of required compliance with objective design review standards, and that bill came in and is still in effect. The Housing Crisis Act is another one that you might be familiar with, or Senate Bill 330, that prohibits cities from enforcing subjective standards on multi-unit housing. And there's been additional legislation passed starting in 2022, and it seems like every year that mandates streamline review for certain types of projects in certain locations that are consistent with objective design and development standards. Also importantly, this project implements a housing element program, HE7, Objective Design Standards, that was meant to provide alternatives to conventional zoning and provide this process for developers seeking a more streamlined alternative. That one is, timeline to complete that was the end of this year. We also are doing this to provide certainty and consistency, so applicants and staff know what requirements apply when looking at objective housing projects. The standards are measurable and verifiable, and the same rules apply no matter who's reviewing the project. I want to stress, though, here that we will have 2 design review options in our city. The subjective process is what we have available today. Applicants can choose to use this process if they have a project that doesn't comply with the objective standards, or they want to use a different type of architectural style, or they want to go to design review to get that kind of feedback, they can do that process. Otherwise, if they want to do an objective process, they comply with the objective design standards and they go through that process. And I'll talk a little bit more later about how that process will work. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the background. So you may be wondering, what is an objective standard? This is a quote from the state, that there's no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. They're uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion. So if you compare what we have multiple architectural design guidelines in our city, which are mainly subjective, whereas the odds would be objective. They include recommendations for design, whereas the odds would be requirements for design. Our current guidelines are open to interpretation. They use the terms should and may, whereas objective standards need to use shall and must. And they are adopted by resolution, whereby this, if it gets approved, would be adopted by ordinance. So the areas of the city that could use this process are colored here in green. And so those are all areas of the city that currently allow 2 or more residential units. So it could be residential zones, residential multi-unit zones, or our commercial or manufacturing zones that allow housing units. What you see here in the white color are the city's single-unit neighborhoods, or other parcels that are excluded would be areas that are zoned for parks and recreation. It also will not apply to accessory dwelling units or additions to existing housing units or mobile home parks. This timeline shows the overall process we went through to create this document. It's been about a 3-year process. It started in 2021 when we got a $300,000 grant from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And that enabled us to hire a consultant, Opticos Design, to work on this project with city staff. The consultant has over 20 years' experience in these types of products, and we had a great working relationship with them, and they have won awards for this type of work. Since then, we have had multiple drafts available. We've had many work group meetings, community engagement, and public hearings. The next few slides goes into a little more detail about that. So some of the major milestones have included release of 5 drafts of the objective design standards, starting with an admin draft, public drafts, and then these adoption drafts. This document's been available for public input for months at a time, so we are happily taking comments and responding to them. I'll talk about the work group in a minute, but we've had 10 meetings with our work group. 6 meetings with ABR and HLC, so 3 meetings each to overview of this document and ask for their input. We had 2 public outreach surveys. One was early on to ask people their preferences for certain housing types, and the second one was to do with the architectural styles map, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail later. And I've given 5 or more presentations before the American Institute of Architects, Habitat for Humanity, and with developers in our community. So the work group has been instrumental to the success of this document. They worked with us. We've had those meetings. We've got a lot of input from the work group, and it's been a great relationship, and we couldn't have done it without them. So it includes members of the Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Historic Landmarks Commission, and American Institute of Architects. Again, just to talk a little bit more about the community engagement over the last 3 years, we have a dedicated web page, and we've published 2 fact sheets about the project and a video. Again, I mentioned the 2 surveys, so we got input from the public early on and then later in the process on these 2 topics. Again, I already mentioned the presentations we've given, and outreach to developers also included our consultant doing stakeholder interviews, and they also talked to permit planners and affordable housing advocates early on in the process to help formulate where we were going with it. Okay, so next I will give you a guide to how this document works and how it would be used by an applicant. So before I go there, I just wanted to cover the intent. Again, it's to have predictable outcomes in entitlement review. There's a big overarching theme in this document for pedestrian-oriented development, and I just wanted to read a quick quote from our consultant because I think he summed it up well. He said, "One of the wonderful things about Santa Barbara is how every building addresses the sidewalk with a clear entry that provides identity to the building while making the streetscape lively and interesting." So this is a real focus of this document, and it's also, we have general plan policies promoting this type of development. It also has a promotion of what's known as missing middle housing, and Opticos Design is actually the originator of that term. And what I mean by that is that there's building types that promote, on the smaller lots and in the less intense neighborhoods, duplexes, multiplexes with maybe 3 or 4 units, cottage courts, which are those nice little single unit units all grouped together in a courtyard style. Housing like that that's often called missing middle because we don't develop a lot of housing that's like 9 or fewer units in our city. And buildings that fit well with the existing development. Just a brief overview of what's in here. There are 8 chapters covering all these different topics, so I'll touch upon those as I go through the guide. So one thing that's super helpful in this document for applicants is quick code guides. So there's 2 of them. The first one's in the beginning of the document, and it sort of guides applicants on where they need to go when they have a project, what sections of the document cover what topics. So it has guidance for before you begin, how you design your site, designing the form, activating the streetscape, applying the style, and submitting the project. In the architectural styles chapter, there's another quick code guide that guides them through how that works as well. And so this has been a real helpful way to get through a document that is admittedly a little long. It's almost 200 pages, but applicants don't need to know the entire document. They just need to know what zone they're in, what building type they're using, what frontage they're using, and what style, and then you can cut out the parts that aren't relevant to your project. I think it's important for you to know that density is the same as what applies to projects using our current zoning ordinance or Title 30. It comes from the general plan land use element. Minimum density for projects using the odds is the base zone plus 1 unit. And then the maximum is per whatever the underlying land use designation is. For example, it could be 28 to 36 dwelling units an acre. Sorry, did you have a question or should I keep going?
Sorry, I didn't mean to call it. Will you just repeat that last sentence you just said?
Oh, so the density comes from the land use element, and it's whatever the underlying land use designation allows. Just like Title 30, ODDS has a zone map and has divided or designated parcels into 5 different zones. The intent of these zones are to sort of repeat what the existing character of that neighborhood is and what the prevalent patterns are and provide transitions. So you transition from your single unit neighborhoods into what's called neighborhood medium with the sort of 2-unit development. And as you go closer and closer to the downtown core, the zones get a slightly more intense building types, larger buildings, potentially higher buildings. They all conform to our existing height standards, but they increase in intensity and allowed building types as you get closer to the downtown core. I think I want to point out here, though, that if you're in the downtown core or downtown edge and you have a small lot, you're still allowed to build the less intense building type. You could build a duplex or a fourplex. It's sort of consistent with the way we handle pyramid zoning now. You can have all the building types in the more intense zones. Next, the applicant would design their site, so they apply what's known as a design site size. A design site is essentially the same as a lot size, but one thing that's a little bit unique about it is in the case of a parcel being a little bit larger, maybe 10,000 square feet or more, they have the option to do multiple design sites, and that way you could have multiple buildings on your lot, but you don't have to legally subdivide them. So that's a concept that's different in this document. Next, they would select a building type. There's a menu of 10 different building types, and those are meant to articulate the size, scale, and massing of the zone that they're in. And also apply placement standards. And again, it's an overarching theme in this document that living spaces are placed close to the public realm to activate the street and provide that pedestrian-friendly design. Vehicle access and parking standards are also applied. Unique to projects using this process is that the vehicle parking is required to be in the back behind the occupiable space of the building, once again to promote that pedestrian-friendly design. incorporate bicycle parking and pedestrian access, and apply open yard and landscape standards. The open yard standards are the same as projects using Title 30, as well as the bicycle parking is the same as what projects use now. Next, what's unique to this document are frontage types. So these are the elements of the building that connect to the public realm, the street and the sidewalk, and create a pedestrian-oriented environment. So there's 10 frontage types. It could be as simple as like the the photo on the top left is a stoop, or it could be a gateway like the top right that goes into an interior courtyard, or in the case of a mixed-use building, a whole shop front is another frontage type. Then the architectural styles are applied. This is sort of like the frosting on the cake. And there are 3 different style groups that we had the funding to do in this project. So there's a craftsman styles group, a Mediterranean style group, and a contemporary style group. These style groups were developed by our consultant based on the most prevalent designs that they saw doing an existing conditions report for us. Under each style group, there's 2 different elements or elements of that style. So you could have craftsman and cottage, Spanish colonial revival, and Italian Mediterranean, or contemporary and industrial under that style group. So finally, the styles are then assigned to a map, and this is pretty unique to our city. I would say this map was probably the subject of more changes and input and outreach than anything else in this document. So what it does is tell an applicant where in the city the style groups apply. And the reason we did this is that our city already has the El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District that already dictates a particular style for new buildings. So we started with that and designated areas of the city in yellow that would apply the Mediterranean style group. Next, if you see it in green, that means you can use the Mediterranean and craftsman style group, and in blue, all style groups are available. Under the blue, there is a sub-style from contemporary style group called industrial, and that is further limited to the areas where have an underlying manufacturing zone. And the reason for that is that manufacturing zones typically have those industrial style buildings already, and staff and the work group felt like we should continue that only in limited areas of the city. And again, there was a lot of public outreach on this map, and Planning Commission gave us further input that we incorporated in the version you see before you today. Finally, there is an ability to apply for exceptions, and these would be minor deviations based on existing site conditions. There's a whole list of certain things that could be changed to do with setbacks, design site size, building placement, things like that. If there's an existing condition that just prevents compliance with the style. Those narrow exceptions would be approved by the community development director. If a project is to the point where it needs a modification, then it's not using this process anymore. That's a discretionary decision that would be a different process. And then it would go through the objective design review process. So I'll give you some highlights about that process. Per our city charter, projects still need to go to the design review board. So there still is a role for going to design review. Concept review and pre-application review is not mandatory. The applicant's welcome to use it if they want to get maybe early feedback on how they are complying with the standards, but it's entirely optional. The way we envision projects being streamlined is that right now, project design and final design approval are typically 2 hearings. In this process, the project would have been thoroughly vetted and deemed consistent with objective design standards, so we can combine that into 1 hearing. So this should save time. Also, the findings are very limited. The findings are just 2, that the project complies with the objective design standards and there's no significant adverse public health or safety impact. And if they can meet those things, it's approved. Another time saver potentially is that the final action, so if it happened to be denied, could only be appealed by the applicant to City Council. No one else can appeal the project at that point. Okay, so I will briefly go over the Title 30 amendments. I know this is a big packet, but they can be simplified and sort of categorized into 4 categories of amendments. First, as we went through this process, we knew we needed to amend Title 30 because we needed to either directly have reference to it for projects using the new Title 25 or the odds, and also for cross-reference purposes. While we were amending certain chapters, we have a list of other amendments that have been needed to Title 30 just to clarify and clean up some things. So we went ahead and amended those chapters that we were already amending, but with no significant change. Same thing about making some clarifications to streamline processes. And we also were able to clean up a few things that were inconsistent with state law. And those things were pointed out to us by Housing and Community Development when we were doing the housing element. So these are minor amendments, but we had the opportunity to do them now. So we went ahead and made those amendments. And it's attachment 3 in your packets, kind of goes through each amendment and what category it fits into. I'll just highlight a few of them. So on the topic of calculating density, the amendments clarify how to define and calculate density, and this is consistent with state law that requires it to be done by dwelling units per acre. But we didn't do anything that would decrease density calculations. On the topic of determining creep top of bank, the current methodology that's in Title 30 related to Mission Creek is subjective, so we needed an objective methodology for projects moving forward. This is, however, a placeholder because Sustainability and Resilience Division is working on creek buffer and top of bank ordinance that will be coming before your committee likely next year. So this is in place just until that process happens, and then it'll be replaced. So there'll be more opportunity to comment on that definition and those buffers at that time. For fractions, this is actually odds related, but also benefits the city-wide because it rounds up density calculations so that more sites can achieve their density maximums. And this is something that came out when we did the progress report on the average unit size density incentive program. And finally, the objective design review section in the amendments describes how that process will work. On the other actions that are in your packet, we do have a need to replace the previously prepared design standards that were adopted in 2021, and those were prepared when Senate Bill 35 passed, and we needed something in place in case a project came in. We needed to have objective standards ready to go. These were designed just to work for Senate Bill 35, and they only allow the Spanish-style architecture, so we always knew we wanted a follow-on project to broaden this and to apply to other types of projects. So in any case, we need to do the formal action to repeal these and replace. The CEQA analysis determined that the odds and the Title 30 amendments are exempt pursuant to minor alterations in land use limitations because the odds do not change the density or intensity of use of land, and the Title 30 amendments are administrative in nature. We analyzed these two components for consistency with the general plan and found that they were consistent with policies that support multi-unit housing, objective standards, pedestrian-friendly design, and protection of historic resources. So finally, I'll just end on the recommendation to amend the Muni Code to add Title 25 Objective Design and Development Standards, repeal Resolution number 21031 that adopted those previous objective design standards for streamlined housing projects, amend the Title 30 zoning ordinance chapters pertaining to process and other regulations for the odds and to implement those cleanup items, and determine the odds in the Title 30 amendments are exempt from CEQA and are consistent with the general plan. One more slide about next steps. We originally were hoping for adoption in December 2024. If this gets continued, then that'll be pushed out a little bit further. And then in 2025, hopefully we would have our effective date, and staff will do training for staff and applicants. And we will be preparing forms and handouts specific for projects using this process. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to public comment as promised then.
So our first speaker will be Cass Enberg.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I am an architect, and I was honored to participate as a member of the Objective Design Development Standards Work Group as a representative for AIASB. I also serve on the Historic Landmarks Commission, but today I am here to speak for myself and my own opinions. And I thank the planners, thank you, Rosie Dicey, for that very clear and thorough presentation. I support the design development standards before you, and I just have a couple of comments. First of all, I want to say that I'm very proud of the community. I think we are being very successful. And I'm sure you all saw the great article, the Josh Molina article this morning on the beautiful new Soltara apartment building. And right downtown at the old Staples parking lot. It's big, it's beautiful, it's 79 units, and it's a great example, in my opinion, of a perfect building for Santa Barbara in the perfect place. There's a lot of, as I drive around.
I'm sorry.
Yes?
Chair Gordon, so I apologize.
Oh, no, no.
Ginsburg. It was my understanding that Ms. Ginsburg was going to be speaking on behalf of the boards and the Planning Commission.
Oh, so should I?
So if she's going to speak for the boards and Planning Commission, she gets 10 minutes, but if you're going to speak for yourself, you get whatever the standard 2 minutes.
Okay, so, thank you. Yeah, I think you got a letter from the work group, so I was going to let you rely on that. So, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll just continue from where I was. So as I drive around town, I see a lot of projects under construction. So I'm really delighted to see many new projects coming. Either, the construction fence is up, they're getting ready to go. So the second thing is the streamlining. And we're trying to find ways to streamline. Well, how do we do that? We have two key pieces. We have our community and our development for our community and what our community wants to see. And that's what we do, we achieve through design review for the style and the preservation of our community. The other thing is building and safety. And building and safety, of course, we live in this amazing place with all this natural beauty, and with that comes great challenge, because we have the mountains, we have the ocean, we have high fire, we have heavy rain and water flow, we have the rock claws, we have flooding, we have high water table, we have unstable soils. So we have all these very, very challenging things that we have to, in design, resolve. So the traditional design review, to me, is that is how the neighbors and the community can have input, so that they can express what their concerns are. And when we incorporate them and we include them, then we have a happy situation. If they are not included and they feel excluded, then they will be upset and they will be in opposition, and we will have conflict and appeals. So the design review gets blamed a lot of time for, causing delays, but oftentimes it's because it's the mediation between the community if they're upset. If they're not upset, if the designer has done a good job to include them, then these projects sail through very quickly. That said, the Objective Design Development Standards is required, and as you saw this great presentation. I think it has just been very thoughtfully put together. And with this sort of expedited review process comes constraints. So you have to kind of take that with it. So I very much support, I think that the ODDS is very, very well done, and I think it was very thoroughly reached out to the community and included the work group of professionals, and I very much support it. And if I could, the one thing I would change about it is I would remove the contemporary style altogether. I think that the contemporary style is too unique and difficult and creative, that it's best dealt with through full design review. So thank you very much. I appreciate it and look forward to this new document. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question for you, Cass.
Yes, yes.
So is there something out there in your world that's a softer thing than contemporary, but is kind of contemporary? So is there something that's not craftsman, not, what's the other one, Mediterranean, but is not, stone walls, glass, and metal that is, I don't know, that's about as smart as I am in this area, okay?
It's a really good question. What sort of comes up kind of immediately is sort of maybe the international style is a really beautiful style, and it is very, you can define it. So if there was something like that in the contemporary realm, I think that could work. But where I get into trouble or have challenges with the contemporary style is that it's being invented as we speak. There's just new materials, there's new ideas. The way you might treat it is just, it's all open. It's not an old style that's existed for 100 years that you can very easily, like craftsman, is really easy to describe. It's not, so I think it's sort of a double-edged sword, It's like you need more creativity for the contemporary style because you're doing all these new things. So that's why it's not that I'm against contemporary, I love it, but it has to be more creative. And so how do you put that into a quantitative description that we require for these objective design development standards? So that's why I say that, and thank you for that question.
So it's really kind of like there's no good answer, and it should run the gauntlet, whatever that answer might be, right?
Yeah,
Outside of the odds program,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
So then you come to design review, you can say, hey, I've got this great idea, it's really different, it's never been seen before, and you sell it,
Okay.
right? So that's why, and I really appreciate, you're dealing at the design review, you have other professional architects who are looking at this work, and they will say, oh, yeah, that's a really cool idea, did you think about this, or, So I don't see it as a negative at all. I think it's very positive, and in our schooling, the critique is everything. It's just like, you write a document and then you say, could you please look at this because I probably will not catch the errors. So it's very, very important, that critique part of it, to get the very, very best design. So thank you for that question.
Thanks.
I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Next speaker is Fred Sweeney.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Gutierrez, Ms. Snedden. You have a copy of my comments. I'm going to read them so we stay in the time frame. But I am coming to you because Ms. Deisty and her staff and Dan and others have spent a long time doing this. And about 3 years, probably more than 3 years ago, once I was aware of this, I got concerned about ordinance creep. And I began to dive into this. So I could speak for a long time about several things, but I just want to point out two. Style. There are and have been many books and articles written about Santa Barbara's architectural heritage, particularly point to chapters in the book by Kevin Starr, Material Dreams, Southern California through the 1920s, and an article by Hilda Blanco called Style Matters, The Case of Santa Barbara, published in October of 2000. Both these writings point out the importance of Santa Barbarians maintaining and preserving our architecture and words of caution about allowing other styles to impact our city. Currently, there's a small, very vocal group next-generation designers and architects who are lobbying to keep the odds free of the word style. We must remain diligent to maintain and find ways to allow other styles, such as contemporary, to weave into the fabric of our topography and our city landscape. Many of my fellow architects have practiced and continue to practice here and contribute to that style, understanding this quality is well known around the world. Secondly, Howard Whittosh, a colleague of mine and friend, asked me to read a paragraph from him. He worked on the odds language for over 6 years back when it was the Spanish thing and when he was on ABR. He says, I have a note made during the process that architects' input has been ignored, suspended, or lost in translation. We were trying to find a language that codified vertical and horizontal articulation of building mass, keeping in mind that staff would be making the call of an applicant developer chose to pass design review. And he saw in the document, and you have the tables, 80 feet is too long for a 3 or 4 story building to go unarticulated in the EPV. Buildings need to be incrementally articulated in 25 to 30 feet lengths and with 2 to 3 stories heights. This is to simulate lot sizes and architectural features such as decks, balconies, loggias with characterized historic development over time and to avoid bland massing that occurs when small lots are merged into large parcels and the canyon effect. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Sheila Lodge.
Good afternoon, members of the Ordinance Committee. I'm Sheila Lodge. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'm here to urge you to, initially I was here to urge you to remove the contemporary style from the Upper State Street area. But ideally, it would be removed entirely from the odds ordinance. Obviously, you need to adopt this ordinance. A huge amount of work went into it, and it needs to go ahead. But it needs to go ahead without that option. In 1933, when the boundaries of EPV were changed to include both sides of West Carrillo, Castillo Streets between the freeway and Garden and State Street, it was because they are entries into the city. As David Gebhardt used to say, when you see a building in Santa Barbara, you should know you're here. Upper State, Hope, and La Cumbre are also entrees into the city. When the odds were before the Planning Commission meeting, it came with a recommendation for contemporary for the east and west sides. The commission voted to remove those, and they're no longer allowed there. So it can be done. My colleagues disagreed with me when I said I thought Upper State should be also removed from it. Contemporary should be removed from Upper State, and one of them pointed out, well, it's already there. Well, yes. But is that a reason to encourage more of that? I don't think so. It's hardly a reason to allow more architectural design so inappropriate to Santa Barbara. It's the city's distinctive Mediterranean style for which it is famous. Please help keep Santa Barbara special and remove the contemporary style, at least from the Upper State Street area, ideally from the entire odds ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Johnson.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My narrow concern is top of bank. Please note that no FEMA nor Army Corps document defines top of bank. There is no objective definition, or you'd find it in one of those two documents. Any objective formula is going to produce absurd results. That's the case for this language, the proposed language. The most absurd aspect of it is that there are cases where top of bank will be found to be outside the floodplain. Just imagine this, narrow creek, vast, wide floodplain. Top of bank is somewhere way outside the floodplain. That is an absurd result. That's what this proposed standard will produce. It's not hypothetical. Ask staff to defend their top of bank determinations for 515 West Los Olivos or 1611 Castillo. Both determinations of top of bank were well outside the 100-year floodplain. I'm just going to briefly also mention that AUD zoning has been a failure, and the odds zoning perpetuates that failure. There's an acute bias against moderate income housing. The bias is clearly spelled out in the general plan. The AUD's minimum size is too high. It should be 600 square feet. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ellen Bilston?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you to staff for all the time and effort that's gone into this document and for the Ordinance Committee's attention to this really important issue. ODS is how this process began from the state mandate for us to come up with objective design standards as an alternative to our subjective process. That was the simple mandate that was laid out to the city to satisfy, which was done in 2021. An objective design standard was developed very much in alignment with El Pueblo Viejo and was imposed or was applicable to the entire city. What happened after we hired the consultant, Opticos, is quite a development of an entirely different sort of ordinance that includes development standards above and beyond what the state was looking for from our city in response to the need. That, I believe, is where, as a local architect, the firm focused on multifamily housing and very dedicated to alleviating the lack of housing in our community, is where I think we've got a fundamental problem with where we've landed with ODDS. I believe that we should stick with providing design standards and not venturing into development standards that are different from the zoning standards that we have for all other projects in the community. We're creating a disconnect between the projects that invoke ODDS and the interest of a streamlined process. The whole goal here, as Dan mentioned at the very beginning of our meeting today, is there's a need for accelerated housing production. Similar to that, there's an incredible need for affordability, and creating a streamlined process for housing approvals in the community should be our goal. My concern is that the 200 pages of development standards mixed in with design standards confuses the issue and makes these much more complicated projects to pursue. As a result, my concern is that it won't get used. Since it's an option, most people, and talking to my colleagues in the architecture field, generally feel that they would rather go the current route of subjective design review than figure out how ODDS works, which appears to be a much more complicated approach. One thought is that the time and effort and all the work that's gone into developing the ODDS If the city's intent is to develop form-based zoning, then break it off from this document and pursue that in its own right as a separate effort. Thank you.
Our final in-person speaker is Kevin Dumaine.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Dumaine. I'm an architect with Design Arc Architects in Santa Barbara. Given that this is going to occupy an entire chapter in the municipal ordinance, I think we really should stay focused on what's going to make it successful. It needs to be a viable, expedited pathway for private and nonprofit clients to build housing. Within a few years, if this is done right, hundreds of units should be built under this program. We need thousands of units, but if this can chip away and provide hundreds. It shouldn't be too easy. It shouldn't be the path that every developer follows to build the largest possible projects, but it also cannot be too restrictive. Otherwise, no developer or nonprofit will use it. It needs to find a sweet spot in the middle. Now, I had the opportunity to compare one of our projects, 401 East Haley. It's currently in working drawings. It's a 3-story mixed-use housing over parking, and compared it against the odd standards, and I consistently found a lot of these new rules that would be very restrictive, and you'd not be able to build a project of anywhere near the scope or size of the 401 Haley project that we're working on. For instance, at the ground level, you would have to have setbacks along the rears and side yards. A 6-foot chain-linked off area that's not going to be useful for anybody but hanging out and smoking. And then other requirements to like the commercial spaces along the street frontages would have to be deeper. So you really couldn't do as much parking under that scenario. Then as you go upstairs, you find that you can't build the same layout. You have to use a large courtyard, a donut. And so you're limited by the number of units you can put in the circulation diagram. So you've lost more housing there. And then there's additional volumetric restrictions. So where you might have been able to do a 2-story townhouse in our current scheme, you no longer have the volume to do it, and you can only do a 1-bedroom. So all these restrictions, they add up to less housing in the end, and it would make a project unappealing in that zone for a developer or any other client to build. So my recommendation is, given what I've seen in this large courtyard category in that specific zone, there's probably other problems in the other categories throughout the odds in the city. The city should do some case studies, look into these in greater depth, and make some adjustments so that they can find that sweet spot that'll actually create a program that'll be used. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Jordan, we do have one individual online who would like to make public comment. Thomas, if you can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Hi. I'd like to just share a few thoughts on the objective design standards. I think many of us would agree that it has been a difficult document to navigate, and how it might benefit our community or streamline development is not immediately obvious. For that reason, I think it would be good to further consider its development. I just want to talk about one aspect of the document that I think stood out the most regarding style, the zoning of style, the rules of style, and so forth. 6 styles are given: Spanish, Italian, craftsman, cottage, contemporary, and industrial. As a designer, the exactitude of this section I found problematic, but after further study, I can see that it's educational. It does teach you a lot about what we value in our community, but I think that it's lacking. I wanted to just briefly tell you, talk about a precedent that we might consider relevant to the situation. In the early 20th century, Rome suffered a similar housing crisis where up to 1 million units were needed in the course of 10 years. They did many things that we might want to look at in our situation, but notably the first thing that they did in the housing crisis was to call a competition for design solutions for model examples. This was bolstered by community support and led to rapid construction. These 6 style categories we have are our model examples. And what must be noted about the Spanish architecture is that there's endless variation within these categories. It's difficult to categorize and codify the wealth of variation inherent in traditional architecture. I think that there's a huge opportunity to expand this 6 sections, give our community more options, ask our community what they want, what is the shape of the building they want in their community. By doing this, we might draw further support for the document and get us to building faster. Thank you. I feel there's huge opportunity for this section, and thank you for all your work you've done on the document.
Chair Jordan, there's no further speakers.
Thanks. Pretty close to the world will end and we'll get done by 1 o'clock, huh? So as I said, we're going to continue this to December 3rd, but we do have some time here, so I'm just wondering if the committee would like to just make some statements to staff to help guide them on what you'd like to hear on December 3rd. Does that make sense?
Without questions?
Yeah, just kind of general feeling warnings to staff to come back with, to be ready for in December 3rd. I'll just, for those of you sitting out in the audience, we of course got most of this project last Thursday. So the phone book was put in front of us, and I'll just, for me personally, and I think probably for others, it's been a undertaking to really grab it and understand what we're looking at and what we're dealing with. So that's the reason for the more than one meeting concept. So Ms. Sneddon, I'll let you go first then.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I do appreciate the extra time because the phone book is important and worth going through. And even though an applicant might just have to go through one of those routes, we need to read all of them. So I just, for comments, this has been quite a feat. I really, when this first was coming through, it seemed impossible to come up with even definitions of these particular styles or how to apply them. You've been working overtime on this and on the housing element and how all these tie together. So, I mean, comments, thank you. And thank you to the working group and all your volunteer time in taking this so seriously. I will have questions. So I don't know if warning exactly, but questions about the exceptions and, do we even have to have exceptions and what the threshold is? And then questions about the appeal process. I did note that the appeal will be by applicant to City Council, but no one else could appeal. So just questions about how big those modifications might be while still being considered modifications. And I did look through the table in detail on that, but I think just more on that. More thoughts on the contemporary style throughout, questions on that. And then maybe I could just have this one, well, I'll put this question and maybe it can be answered today, but since we have Title 25, do we have objective design standards in place until this is passed, or are we in a time rush? Are we vulnerable for not having objective design standards, or does Title 25 or other cover us in the time being? And that can wait too if you don't want to answer that today.
Chair Jordan and Commissioner Sneddon, I can answer that one. So we still have the ones that I mentioned earlier, the Senate Bill 35 objective design standards. They haven't been repealed yet, so they are in place if they were needed. And then some of our standards or guidelines may have some standards that are objective, but probably not much. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel okay putting this off a couple meetings until we can get to the details of this. We're not.
I did want to mention though that I mentioned earlier there's a grant that funded this project, and per the grant timeline, the state is looking for this to get adopted by the end of this year.
Okay.
And so we will be needing to talk to them if it's delayed.
Thank you for that. I think with this short delay, we'll still be able to meet the deadline?
Well, the deadline was actually, it was a few months ago, to be honest, but they've given us a little extra time. If it's delayed beyond the end of this year, we would have to talk to them. I'm not sure what their response will be.
Okay, so I'll make the comment, my last comment is, let's not delay past the next meeting. Thank you.
Do you have anything? Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for the extension, and it's been a busy time on and off the dais up here, so much appreciated for the extra time to go over all the information. And also just want to invite all the public speakers to reach out to us and meet with us individually to go over everything in more detail. Thank you.
And I'll have tons of questions, so I'll help you with some now. But I obviously plan on meeting with you guys a couple times. So big picture, more that I want to hear information about is that the odds is not mimicking the historical deficiencies of subjective processes. So some of you know from our talk the other day, I have a poster child for that around the corner, that the discretionary process loses a floor and loses units and loses an inclusionary unit. And so are we just codifying that type of result, or are we actually codifying a result that remedies those historical deficiencies, particularly when it comes to housing, and especially then when it comes to opportunities for affordable housing? Are we helping it pencil out, or are we leaving it to still have to run the gauntlet of a discretionary program because we're not helping it pencil out through the odds? And there's some places in the city where you blend styles. So if you have Mediterranean downtown, is that Mediterranean downtown stricter than the Mediterranean creeping over towards the Mesa, where it could be Mediterranean or Craftsman? Are we really making an emphasis on the existing areas where we really have Mediterranean results and making sure those are Mediterranean? We have time for me. I'll give you an example, and I don't know what I'm talking about, but there's on the exterior of a building downtown, particularly a two-story building, there's a treatment where those beams that have the little curl on the end come out under the roof. Okay, good, thank you. And then sometimes, as you're looking up, the underside of the roof has actual paint or tile or design. Okay, thank you. So this is really cool, I think. I don't know what it's called. I don't get paid the dollars to know what it's called. But that, to me, is a very cool standard of measurement of Mediterranean. And is that what we're talking about when we're talking about these styles? And is that very strict in the downtown? But if you want to do Mediterranean in a shopping area over on the Mesa or creeping over to the Mesa, do you really have to go to that detail and expense to do that? Those kind of questions. How do they, particularly where you're blending styles, and are we really having to meet the same standard outside the downtown as we are in the downtown, where it is only Mediterranean and that is being held to the highest style? I'll have questions about the legality of the odds, given the context of offering anything that reduces available density or units. So even though you have another pathway, can we legally offer an option that reduces those as an incentive? Questions on exceptions also, whether that's really CD director or designate. The standards that you have for vehicles, open space, or open yard and landscape are not further burdening a project over what would be allowed to chase in a discretionary pathway. That again, I'm looking for an odds that we all know there's tension between everything you read in the general plan. One pace is honor our historical, cultural heritage, live within our resources. The other place is build some housing, darn it, right? Okay, so we know those tensions exist. But is the odds taking every opportunity to chase those areas where we're having trouble getting to the build more housing, make a pathway, make it pencil out, when historically we know that the discretionary process has not had the best results. And so are we remedying that with odd pathway, or again, it's back to, I think, my first kind of conceptual issue, are we just codifying as a baseline what the results have been, which I would say we haven't had the results we want in housing, and increasing the avenue size for better results with the odds, rather than just living with baseline through the odds that is that same restricted pipeline. So that's kind of where most of my efforts are focused on in reading this monster and trying to understand it. And with that, do we need, oh, wait, not there yet. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one more question that I'll be asking the next meeting is this top of bank issue and whether it can stay in place until sustainability and resilience come forward with their ordinance, because I know it is very tricky. So some questions on that when it comes back.
Ms. Hustringer, do we need a motion to continue?
It'd be nice if we could get a motion to continue to December 3rd.
If the two of you would help me with that.
I'll make a motion to continue.
That's to December 3rd.
December 3rd.
Second.
Okay, so we'll just take a quick vote.
Moved by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Sneddon to continue item to December 3rd Ordinance Committee at 12 p.m. Go ahead and vote.
Okay, and just for those in the audience, Madam Assistant City Administrator, on my advanced schedule, we had December 3rd, we had the odds going to council, but the one I have doesn't have anything on December 10th yet. Are we just moving the trip to council a week later on the 10th of December then? Would that be the process for those in the audience?
We would have to look at that. So we'll definitely move this to ordinance on December 3rd.
Okay.
And then we need to look at our calendar for when to
Not
bring
a
it back to full
chance that we will
council.
do a back-to-back on December 3rd, is there?
Chair Dorn, I think it might depend on what the level of input is and what the staff would need to bring back to full council.
Okay, all righty. Okay, thank you.